pension investment. It never says, well, last year the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board did very well. As a matter of fact, they earned rates of return of 20%. Oh my. And so also, your pension checks are going to increase this year by 20%. Of course, that never happens because far from your pension checks being calculated based on how well the investments, the Canadian Pension Plan investments do, instead, they're calculated based on how many years you worked, how much you made while you were working, and how long you worked or how long you worked before you decided to pull your pension. So whether or not you pulled it at 66 or 70 and so on, that changes how much you earn in retirement. Those are the three factors that determine how much your pension check is every month. How long you worked, how much you made while you were working, and the age at which you decided to pull your pension. So those factors combine and they generate for Canadians an average payout each month of not $10,000, certainly not $5,000, not even $2,000, but rather those factors combine to generate for Canadians an average payout every month of $758. That's all. And of course, that $758 is taxed. That's used as taxable income. And so now we can answer the question, are your rates of return as an individual 10%, as politicians propose that they are, or they insinuate that they are? And of course, the answer is manifestly not. Instead, your returns look something like 3, 3.5%, maybe. The older you are, the higher, on average, your returns are. For someone like me, who's born in the 90s, I'm expected to receive a return when I retire from the Canadian Pension Plan of about 2.5%, maybe. And then, of course, people will argue, well, those returns are indexed to inflation. So even if inflation continues to rise, you shouldn't be worried because the rates of return, as anemic as they are, we've discovered, are indexed to inflation. But of course, the problem with that is that you have to believe government's numbers about inflation, which I don't. I believe they calculate it incorrectly. As an economist, I believe they calculate the inflation numbers incorrectly. I think they use high prices, which are a symptom of inflation, but are not inflation itself. Instead, inflation simply means the increase of the supply of money in an economy. So not only are your returns anemic, 2.5, 3, 3.5%-ish, not only are they poor returns, but more than that, even though government says they're properly indexed to inflation, I don't buy it for a moment. And those returns are taxed. So your benefit from the CPP is really so much lower than what, of course, the government, or at least the proponents of the CPP, would have you believe that it is. This is so typical of government. They love these big, massive bureaucratic programs so that they can exercise more control over a population while at the same time saying it's absolutely necessary. What would we do without the CPP? What would we do without government? What would we do without big bureaucracy? We would be lost. We wouldn't know where to turn, which of course is complete and and utter nonsense. Now, the CPP itself, as I mentioned before, operates as a pay-as-you-go system. That means that as much as the CPP takes in, it also shovels out to seniors across the nation. Now, for every province, the formula by which the CPP collects earnings, collects contributions, is the same. Now, Quebec is exempt from that because Quebec has their own pension plan. They always have. But for every other province, it's the same. So the formula in BC for pension collections for the CPP contribution rates is the same as it is in Alberta. That formula is again composed of a few factors. However, the demographics in the provinces are different. So, all that to say, while the contribution rates are the same in BC as they are in Alberta with regards to how much money comes off your paycheck every month to be shoveled into the CPP, the actual demographics of the provinces look different. You see, Alberta is younger. on average than other provinces. Alberta also works more on average than other provinces. And Alberta is wealthier on average than other provinces. Once again, those three factors combine to create a situation where Albertans disproportionately contribute to the CPP and have almost every year since the inception of the CPP. We can't use the word over contribute. I often hear commentators talking about how we're over contributing to the pension plan, to the Canadian pension plan, but that's not quite accurate language. Disproportionately, we are contributing disproportionately. That's accurate. But we can't say over because, again, the formula is the same for us in Alberta as it is for BC. But because we're younger, wealthier, and work more than other provinces, we have now a situation, and we have had a situation, again, almost every single year since the CPP has been created, in which Alberta pays not just $1 or $2 more into the pension plan compared to what our seniors receive, but rather we pay billions more into the pension plan every single year compared to what our seniors receive. 2.5 billion, 3 billion, and so on is the surplus that we see year after year after year after year. That's our net contribution to the CPP. So, for example, if we contributed one year $9 billion, if the CPP collected $9 billion from Albertans in pension contributions, then, Alberta might pay out, or excuse me, the CPP might pay out to Alberta some $6-ish billion, leaving that $3 billion surplus that Alberta's contributed to the CPP. Now, over the years, that has accumulated into a $60 billion plus net surplus into the Canadian pension plan. Albertans explicitly have paid $60 billion more into the pension plan since the pension plan's inception compared to how much Alberta seniors have received. But really, when we invoke inflation again, we realize that number is actually so much larger than what the initial number says. We see $60 billion, and that's a big number, it's true. But when you factor first inflation into account, Trevor Tombe, a man you mentioned at the start, has estimated that number looks more like $80 billion, which is not insignificant. But it's really so much worse than that. We've contributed so much more than that. When you look at what's called opportunity cost, what that means is we have to ask the question, what exactly does it look like if we were able to invest that $60 billion compared to what we have right now? So suppose that we didn't shovel an excess $60 billion into Ottawa, into the CPP, and instead kept that money in Alberta and used it to invest. Can you imagine the money? Can you imagine how much wealth this province could have generated? Can you imagine how much more money we would have sitting in our pockets than we do right now? So the loss that we've accrued as a consequence of shoveling all of this money into Ottawa is almost unfathomable. It's a huge, huge missed opportunity. It's a huge missed opportunity for wealth that instead was used to feed this massive CPP machine. Now, we're also often hearing about what's called unfunded liabilities. That is, Canada is getting older, or more accurately, more and more baby boomers are retiring or are set to retire. As it stands right now, we're still paying more into the pension. The country itself is paying more into the pension than what pensioners are earning. That's true. But that's set to change in just a few years, right? In just 2 years, the situation is going to invert. And the Canadian pension plan is going to be paying out more money to Canadians compared to what what contributors are shoveling into the plan. So, as a hypothetical example, if we pay pensioners $60 billion 1 year, if the Canadian pension plan pays out pensioners $60 billion 1 year, it's only going to generate from contributions maybe 55 billion or 57 billion. And there's going to be a net loss. We're not going to have a surplus. There's not going to be extra money to invest. There's not going to be extra money for the CPPIB to invest, as there is right now. But of course, we also have to be very careful insofar as we're trying to promote the facts as objectively as they exist. And even though we believe that the facts demonstrate a opportunity or a variety of reasons to generate our own pension plan, our own Alberta pension plan, we also don't want to fall to the sin of political newspeak. And, we don't want to fall to the problem of manipulating numbers, or at least the reality of the numbers, to try and fit our narrative. So, while it's true that the pension plan, the Canadian pension plan, is almost at a state where pensioners are going to be receiving more than what's being contributed into the Canadian pension plan. And while that's going to continue for a long time, it's not necessarily, at least as far as the analysis is concerned, correct to say that the pension plan is what's called unsustainable. So here's what the situation looks like right now. The Canadian pension plan itself has accumulated some 575 billion, 580, 590 billion, somewhere in there, billion dollars worth of assets. And of course, I'm assuming that what the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board is telling us is true. That's for a man to decide whether or not that's the reality. But in order to perform this analysis, we have to assume that those numbers are accurate and true. Let's suppose it's $580 billion that the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board has in assets. Okay, so that's on one side. And then, of course, we have all of the contributions that are being shoveled into the CPP every single year, and the payouts that are being shoveled out of the CPP every single year. Now, as it stands right now, the assets, the 575, $580 billion of assets, are sitting here on the right side. No one's touching them, right? Not the government can't dip into it legally. They're not allowed to. They're just sitting, let's say, in a little box. That's where the assets are. And all of the payouts to seniors are being funded by contributors on the left side over here. But when we reach the point here in just 2 years where the payouts will exceed contributions, then the CPP is going to start dipping into its accumulated assets to help pay out the seniors that are due their pension checks. And of course, the number or the amount that they dip into the pension plan or into the assets will change yearly, depending on what the numbers look like. Now, as the seniors' payouts begin to grow and continue to grow, the CPP is going to have to dip into more and more assets. And as we look down the line, as we look down 70 some years into the future, we realize that there is over $1 trillion in what's called unfunded liabilities. What that means is, if we stopped contributing to the CPP altogether and just used assets to pay out seniors every year, just use the Canadian Pension Plan assets to pay out seniors who paid into the pension plan every year, we would be in an unfunded position of about 1.14 or 1.4, whatever it is, 1 point some trillion dollars, which is of course a massive shortfall. Now, granted, it won't be the case. At least this is what the numbers assume. It won't be the case that contributors will stop contributing. Instead, people are going to keep contributing. And so when you add those numbers into account, although the pension plan is dipping into the assets, the fund is still deemed sustainable. Now, of course, that's up for interpretation. I myself am not a fan of peering so far into the future. I think it's a very dubious thing to do. I think it's a very dangerous thing to do. And I think we should be very suspect of the numbers that analysts give us when you consider, for example, that Tiff Macklem told us that the inflationary period was going to be short and transitory. That was a lie. That was wrong, right? Whenever these economists, whenever these analysts peer into the future and give us some prophecy, the prophecy is always wrong. It's never accurate, because the models have to rely on so many variables that can change in a moment, and when they do change, affect the model in such a magnificent way that it's almost impossible to accurately predict what the future is going to hold. All that said, costs for the Canadian pension plan, or the payouts, are increasing. The contributions that are being shoveled into the pension plan are not going to be able to keep up with how much seniors are owed. And so the pension plan very soon is going to begin dipping into the assets to help pay the um, for the liabilities for what seniors are owed. So we have a state now where, one, Alberta contributes massive amounts of money to the Canadian pension plan every year, far more than what its seniors receive. And this has been happening year after year after year. And secondly, the second point of this situation is that the Canadian pension plan is not the juggernaut that our politicians lead us to believe it is. That is, it's not this massive pension that, at least for individuals, gives monstrous payouts, even though they've contributed thousands and thousands of dollars all of their lives into the pension plan. And thirdly, Canada is getting older, and the Canadian pension plan is going to have to start dipping into assets to help pay for the money that seniors are owed. All of this combines, all of these factors combine to leave us as Albertans, and other Canadians for that matter, but to leave us as Albertans in a state where we are poorer than we otherwise could be. We're not treating our seniors right. Think, for example, about the lost income, the lost money that could be available to a senior had he not instead, for 40 years, shoveled all of these excess thousands of dollars into the Canadian pension plan to feed that Eastern machine. Can you imagine the money available? If instead of contributing, let's say $6,000, instead of contributing $6,000 or $3,000 or four, whatever the number might be, it changes. This year, I believe it's $4,000 is the maximum. Let's say $3,000. Instead of contributing $3,000 into the pension plan every year as an individual, let alone the business who covers the other half, you took that money and invested it. And you invested that money year after year after year after year. After 40 years, can you imagine how much money would be available to you as a senior that you wouldn't have to wait month after month after month for to be handed out a check by government, but could instead be used as you will, as you desire? What I'm trying to display here, what I'm trying to picture, is just how much lost wealth we're suffering through right now as a consequence of the way this Canadian pension plan is structured, set up, and operated. So that's the system as it stands right now. What about an Alberta pension plan? First of all, is it possible that we could have one? And secondly, what would it look like if we did have one? Well, could we have one is the first question. The answer is yes. The answer is manifestly yes. As a matter of fact, Danielle Smith doesn't even need a referendum to announce an Alberta pension plan. Legally, she has the ability to simply say, right now at a moment's notice, Alberta is announcing its intention to leave the Canadian pension plan, and we're going to do so. Now, that triggers a 3-year period of negotiation and setting up new structures and so on. But at any rate, Danielle Smith can, at any point, legally say, we're leaving the Canadian pension plan as Albertans, and we're starting our own Alberta pension plan. Now, of course, there are stipulations to that. The first and perhaps most important stipulation being, if Alberta is going to leave the Canadian pension plan, it must guarantee Albertans something that is either similar or better in terms of structure and benefits than the Canadian pension plan. It must guarantee for Albertans something that is comparable to the Canadian pension plan. So, if Alberta said, we're leaving the CPP, and instead we're letting Albertans just invest the money, the saved money, the thousands of saved dollars every year themselves, the feds would say, you can't do that. You can't leave. You can't leave the Canadian pension plan because that would mean you violate the act in doing so. You're not guaranteeing Albertans a similar or better pension plan. And so you have to stay with us. That's what the law requires. Similarly, we couldn't say, Alberta's leaving the Canadian pension plan, and we're going to start our own pension plan where individuals have the option of either opting into the pension plan or opting out of it. Likewise, the feds would say, no, you can't do that because it doesn't guarantee Albertans a similar or better pension plan compared to what they have right now. And so we are in the position of having to play the hand that we're dealt. And the hand that we're dealt is, if we want to escape the Canadian Pension Plan and all of its massive payments and all of its meager returns, then we have to guarantee for Albertans a similar or better pension plan as the alternative, as what the new system is going to be. So that quickly answers the question: as Albertans, as seniors in Alberta, are we in danger of losing our pension? The answer is manifestly not. No, it's impossible that that should be the case, right? Because if it was true that you would lose your pension plan, you would lose your pension payouts, which, again, although anemic, are important in this economy. The federal government wouldn't let us leave the Canadian Pension Plan. So there is absolutely no reason to be concerned or worried that your pension plan is going to disappear into thin air should Alberta choose to leave the Canadian Pension Plan. So can we do it? Yes, we absolutely can. Granted, the Alberta government has said they're going to hold a referendum before they do so, and so we'll have to wait for that referendum. But at any rate, we have the legal right to leave the Canadian Pension Plan, and there's nothing the federal government can do about it. So let's suppose then that we do leave the pension plan. Great. Excellent. It's been decided, right? The government announces its intention to leave and start an Alberta pension plan instead. As I mentioned, that triggers a 3-year period, a 3-year process where institutions are set up and negotiations occur to see exactly how an Alberta pension plan is going to be set up. One of those negotiations, of course, is the asset transfer that Alberta receives from the Canadian Pension Plan. This is perhaps a point of most famous contention as it stands right now. There has been so much talk about the assets, what is Alberta owed in assets from the Canadian Pension Plan, and so on and so on and so on. So how much are we owed? Well, we don't really know. We do know we know we're owed something, but the act itself, according to a variety of economists and politicians and so on, can be interpreted in a multitude of ways. We know how legalese works. We know how legal speak works. A lawyer or a seasoned politician or an analyst or an economist or a financial advisor can twist words and use them to their advantage and to make them mean what they want them to mean. So LifeWorks has said, out of the $575 billion asset amount in the Canadian Pension Plan that they've accrued in investments, Alberta is owed some 330 billion of that 575. So the transfer should be 330 billion to Alberta. That is the amount of assets that this province is owed. Others, like Trevor Tombe again, have said, we think the numbers look more like 120 or 150 billion dollars. We don't think Alberta is nearly owed 330 billion. Instead, it looks more like 120 or 150 billion dollars. It's somewhere in that neighborhood. And so the government then and the other government, both governments, will negotiate and they'll discuss and they'll say, we think this is the number. The government will say, we think that's the number, and they'll meet somewhere at some equilibrium. Again, what does it look like? I'm not entirely convinced one way or the other myself, to be totally honest. I'm probably more on the side of it should be higher, as in like it should be more than 120 billion when you look at all of the opportunity cost and investments and so on. I believe it's higher than 120 billion. But again, legalese, we know how lawyers will try and manipulate those words to instead, from the federal government's position, make that number lower. You see, it's very important for the feds that they keep as much of the assets in the Canadian Pension Plan as possible. Why? Because they use those assets in their books. They use those assets publicly, and they say, but they use them, $575 billion worth of assets, to help offset their spending, if that makes sense. So, as bad as the books are right now, from the federal government's position, they would be so much worse if they completely wiped out the Canadian Pension Plan's assets, and then we'd see another massive added debt of like $575 billion. So they want to keep as much as possible, but here in Alberta, we think we're owed as much as possible. So that's one, of course, of the negotiations that will occur. And then, of course, there are setting up the institutions required for an Alberta pension plan. An Alberta Pension Plan Investing Board is one of those institutions. If we choose to go that route, if we decide to set up our own investing board, which, well, we can talk about that later. Setting up an agency to collect the the contributions from Albertans to then shovel into the investing board is, of course, another institution that needs to be set up, and so on and so on and so on. Great. So let's suppose that we've set up all of these structures and now have an Alberta pension plan in place. Are there benefits? Are there economic benefits for individual Albertans, for Alberta as a whole? Because, of course, if we do all of these things and then yet discover that Alberta is so much worse off after the fact, what's the point of starting our own pension? We should have absolutely no reason to do so, at least economically. We would have no reason to do so. But then again, we have to remember if the benefits are worse than they were with the Canadian pension plan, the federal government wouldn't let us leave the Canadian pension plan. And so it's a point that's moot. It's not even necessary to discuss what would it look like if the benefits were worse, because it wouldn't be a situation that's allowed. Instead, however, there are benefits that Albertans can capture with an Alberta pension plan. First, we wouldn't be shoveling excess billions into Ottawa every single year. That would be something that's said and done, right? We wouldn't be shoveling a net surplus of $3 billion or $2.5 billion into Ottawa year after year after year after year into the Canadian pension plan. Instead, that money would stay in Alberta, or it would be used in an Alberta pension plan. It wouldn't be sent off to the east to big bureaucracy to then be invested as they will. No, instead that would stay here. Now that's fine and dandy, but what about me as an individual? What do I receive from this Canadian pension or from this Alberta pension plan? Well, firstly, we have to remember that we're younger, we're wealthier, and we work more than other provinces on the whole. On the whole, those factors, those demographics, again, combine and they allow us to form a state where either we can, one, maintain payouts for seniors as it stands right now, while lowering contributions for Albertans every year, or we can maintain the contribution rate and we can increase the benefit to seniors. We have one of those two options. Now, let's suppose we go the first. Let's suppose that we say we're going to lower contribution rates while also maintaining the current payouts for seniors. By just how much could we lower contributions by? Well, of course, it depends on how much of a cushion, how much of a safety net do we want? And it also depends on how much we receive in asset from the Canadian pension plan. At any rate, the estimated savings per individual is somewhere between $400 to $600 and $1,400 or $1,200 every single year, which is not an insignificant amount in any economy, let alone this economy. So those are the explicit savings. Let's say it's $1,000 every year, which again is not it's not a ridiculous number to propose. It might be that every Albertan saves $1,000 every single year with an Alberta pension plan without sacrificing payouts for seniors. That's a great saving in itself. But then again, think about the situation if you decided to invest that $1,000 every single year and invested it every year for 40 years. Well, we have the miracle of compound interest. Let's suppose that we earn a very modest return of 7 or 8%. At the end of those 40 years, the individual Albertan who took that $1,000, which otherwise would have been shoveled into the CPP and invested it, will have accumulated hundreds of thousands of dollars to be used again at his wish when he desires it, when he wants. And it's still there if he dies for his spouse. That is, if I accumulate $300,000, let's suppose, as a random number in savings after having invested that $1,000 year after year after year, and I passed away at 65, then my spouse would still have access to those funds, unlike what the situation is with the CPP. Of course, if your spouse tragically passes away at 65, and of course, if your spouse paid into the CPP all his or her life, do you, as the widow or widower, see even a fraction of those Canadian pension plan contributions? Right? You see the smallest amount, $2,500 death payout, and a touch more, and that's all. Right? The difference is magnanimous. So, with an Alberta pension plan, that's one form of increased well-being, of increased benefit. Or, as I mentioned before, we could also maintain the contribution rates, keep things as the status quo, and simply pay out more to seniors. We could pay them out more as they desire. We could use the extra billions again to invest in our own Alberta Pension Plan Investing Board and let them do with that as they will. There are a variety of options that are available to us. What we're trying to do here is capture the Alberta advantage. Again, we're younger, we're wealthier, and we work more. So why would we not capture that and use it for our benefit? We can do so legally. We can do so. We can do so without any, a quote unquote serious hassle. Insofar as the federal government has very little argument against Alberta leaving, considering in the Canadian Pension Plan Act, it is laid out clearly and absolutely that we have the right to do so. And then by doing so, we capture all of these benefits for Alberta. Would the returns be higher for individuals than 2.5% or 3%? Oh, they could certainly be. Again, when you calculate all of the increased savings that could accrue by saving that money and investing it, all of that extra, or by increasing payouts and so on. So the what would you say, the future looks very bright for Alberta. I'm exceptionally excited for what we have the opportunity to accomplish at the present time. Even with just this pension plan, it eliminates so much power that the federal bureaucracy has over us if we decide to form our own Alberta pension plan. It keeps more money in Alberta, and it's an opportunity for us to exercise more autonomy. Now, I haven't talked about how to set up an Alberta Pension Plan Investing Board yet. I haven't talked about what that might look like and what the fallout would be for the rest of the provinces and so on. But maybe if we want to, we can talk about that in questions and so on, or if people are wondering about that, we can discuss as that becomes a little bit more technical. So that's my brief overview of the Canadian Pension Plan and an Alberta Pension Plan, and why I believe as an economist and as a man who desires more autonomy from Ottawa, who desires more freedom from big government and big bureaucracy, we should work as hard as we can to see this pension plan, this Alberta Pension Plan, adopted. Oh, you might be muted there.
Yes, I was. Just so that you're aware, Rumble is not working, so we're only streaming on YouTube and Twitter. So if you could send me a copy of your recording of it, that would be great. Eldon has a question here for you. If Alberta pulls out, will Canada, less Quebec, suffer? Or is it simply a matter of suffering sooner?
That's a good question. Well, yeah, it'll hurt them. So here's my hesitation with the answer. With regards to how much will contributions change for Canada if Alberta decides to leave the Canadian pension plan? Again, it's dependent on how much we take in assets. If we only take $120 billion in assets, which I believe the number is higher, but let's suppose we take $120 billion in assets from the Canadian pension plan, as would be our right to do so. Then, in order to maintain payouts for seniors, the rest of the country would have to increase their contributions by about 1% to the Canadian pension plan, which again, this economy is significant considering how tight every single dollar is, but it's not the 20+% increase in contributions that the left makes it out to be. So in that case, I'm sorry, I messed up the numbers there. If we take 330 billion from assets, our numbers or Canada's numbers increase by 1%. If we only take 120 billion, then Canada's contributions don't increase at all because they still have the assets to dip into. So then their contributions wouldn't increase. Okay, so that's one point there. As far as I'm concerned, the bigger hit comes from the transfers of assets itself. That will hurt the government. They know that if Alberta, and when Alberta, is given the assets that it deserves from the Canadian Pension Plan, their books will look very much worse than what they already do right now. And so that will hurt Canada very desperately. It will certainly hurt the federal government of Canada very seriously because, as you know, billions of dollars, although in this day and age for government is just an accounting error, it actually does matter, especially when those billions increase to hundreds of billions of dollars. That will hurt them. But I think Eldon's quite right. If we don't do something now, then we're going to suffer much greater later, right? This it is not immoral to do what's best for Alberta. The province of Alberta and the government of Alberta has a mandate to serve Albertans. It's not to serve Canadians. That isn't the mandate of a provincial government. Instead, it's to do what's best for the province. And this is what's best for the province. And so I have absolutely no moral conviction about leaving a pension plan or the Canadian pension plan, even though it means that Canadians will be worse off compared to what they are right now, which is already not a good position to be in.
Okay. Now there's going to be a bunch of questions come in here with my lovely wife's name at the top, but they're actually questions that were sent to us by other people, and she's just posted them so that they pop up. Some people are asking what happens to the other benefits associated with the CPP. Will the AbPP match those?
Well, if they mean OAS and the guaranteed income supplement and so on, those are separate from the Alberta Pension Plan and the Canadian Pension Plan. They're two totally different things. They're their own programs, and they don't affect one another, right? If you're earning an Alberta Pension Plan, it's not like government could say no more old age security for you, right? They're totally separate. But again, as I mentioned at the start, as for the benefits themselves with payouts, contributions, and so on, all of those factors, if they don't at least match the Canadian Pension Plan, which they will, then the government wouldn't let us leave. The CPP Act wouldn't allow Alberta to leave the Canadian Pension Plan. So the answer is yes. Will the benefits match? At least match? Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, the analysis shows, will they be better? Yes.
Okay, so AIMCO doesn't have a great track record. Why would I want them to manage an AbPP?
Yeah, you wouldn't. And I don't either. Not as it stands right now. It seems easier. Well, it would probably be easier just to set up a new pension manager. But suppose that nothing changed about AIMCO and Alberta decided to use them as AIMCO stands right now to be the pension manager for an Alberta pension plan. I wouldn't want, in that case, an Alberta pension plan. And here are the reasons. Firstly, AIMCO has severe political interference. MLAs can appoint and remove AIMCO board members as they please, which is bad. That's not a good thing. And we can talk more about why that's the case later on. Secondly, AIMCO does not have the mandate to profit maximize while also maintaining a position of appropriate risk. That is, with their investments, AIMCO doesn't have to make sure they maximize profit without undue risk. Instead, they have other objectives according to the pension plans, the smaller ones, that they manage. That itself is a problem. The actual structure of AIMCO needs reform, and so on and so on. Overarchingly, the problem with AIMCO is that it has political interference. It does not work as a private investment fund would work, and therefore is undesirable for an Alberta pension plan, or for that matter, as far as I'm concerned, any other pension plan. Instead, Alberta's investment manager or Alberta's pension plan investment manager should have one mandate, which is to profit maximize without undue risk. That's it. That should be the entire mandate and objective of Alberta's pension plan investment manager and nothing more. Secondly, Politicians cannot have a single thing to do with the Alberta Pension Plan, let alone the Pension Plan Investing Board. They have to be entirely removed from that institution altogether. Why is that? It's because politicians don't have the mandate in their job description to profit maximize. They couldn't care about profit maximization. That isn't their concern. Instead, their concern is to be reelected. Their concern is to maintain power as long as they possibly can. That's what they want to do. They don't care about earning as much money as possible while mitigating risk. They instead care about holding that golden scepter and holding it for as long as they possibly can. That means they're willing to give out a handout over here or invest in a failing business over there, so long as it means more votes, so long as it means more political power and clout for their campaigns. Now, in politics, that's the way it works, but it can't work like that in a market. It isn't supposed to work like that in an investing market. Instead, investments have one goal, or investment managers should have one goal: maximize those profits. We want as much money as possible while also not being stupid, right? We don't want to generate an excess amount of risk in the process. We don't want to gamble away our retirement. No, instead we want to maintain an appropriate amount of risk while also profit maximizing. So that has to be the mandate of an Alberta investment pension plan manager. And politicians have to be totally separate from that manager. Otherwise, they'll manipulate it to see that their political aims are realized. But it's certainly not impossible to set up our own Alberta investment or Alberta Pension Plan Investment Board. That wouldn't be a difficult thing to do at all. The difficult thing would be to ensure the politicians don't plunge their grubby hands into that institution. But that then is dependent on Albertans to make sure that doesn't happen.
And that brings up the next question that came in. I don't trust the government. How do I know they won't spend it like the Heritage Trust Fund?
Yeah, once again, so as it stands right now with the Canadian Pension Plan, the federal government does not have access to those funds. They can't just, again, this is publicly, at least officially, right? They can't just take their hands and plunge it into the funds, as the Act states. They're not allowed to do that. So the same would have to be the case here with Alberta, right? Again, we can't describe this simply enough. Government has to have nothing to do with this pension plan. They cannot so much as touch like this. They have to be totally separate. It doesn't matter who's in power, right? It might be that we have the most libertarian and carefree, or not carefree, libertarian and careful politician in power one day, but the next we might have Rachel Notley in power once again, or Janice Irwin, or another radical who would see us spend absolutely everything. No, instead it has to be totally separate. Government on one side, the investments on the other, and then as a way to maintain that, as far as I'm concerned, you could write your own Alberta Constitution that guarantees such things. But really, it comes down to Albertans. If Albertans are apathetic, and if Albertans are content to simply sit back and watch their government do whatever they want, then the government will do whatever they want. They'll engage in activities which are not appropriate as far as the ropes of power are concerned, and will instead maintain and increase their influence everywhere that they can. But if Albertans instead watch closely and are active, take active roles in the political arena, then government will be forced to act more appropriately. Westlock is an excellent example of that, of citizens coming together to push back against their government, which was acting unjustly, and so they had to change their position.
Alden has another one here. There's a lot of formal pushback by the public sector unions. Is there something about leaving the CPP that will affect the separate pensions of those organizations' members?
No, this is what's so ridiculous, is that those union members, you're quite right, Alden, they talk often about how bad it would be for us to leave the Canadian Pension Plan, as if they don't receive massive pensions themselves, and more than one pension. It's complete nonsense, right? Take the teachers' union. So you have a teacher's pension, but you also collect as a retired teacher CPP, right? You can have two pensions. And so isolating that if we left the CPP, it's not as though the teachers wouldn't also receive the Alberta Pension Plan. No, on the contrary, they'd still receive that, and the union bosses would still receive all of that, all of those pensions. So no, it's the union. The union pushback against this is purely radical left nonsense. All you have to do is look at the union board members and see who's involved in those institutions, and realize that they're nothing more than mouthpieces for the Liberal government, Liberal policies, progressive policies, and they want to radically transform the nation into one where everyone is destitute and they have complete control over our lives and our children. It's not a radical thing to say. We just have to look at how they're acting right now.
I would 100% agree. This is one that I think that we need to even go in a little deeper if you can, because this is something that anybody that is looked at it and is in support of the ABPP
Mm-hmm.
can't understand, because the unions are going around funding to the tune of millions the pushback on the Alberta Pension Plan, and
Yeah.
it is really disconcerting.
Yeah, it is. And you can, again, so if you want to expand upon it, all you have to say is union bosses have been completely infiltrated by radical activists. All of them are radical. They're radically left. They love politics. They love power, which is the most unnatural thing for any man or woman to love. And their entire desire is to transform the nation again into this socialist state where everyone is broke, everyone is poor, and everyone relies on bureaucracy to so much as have a loaf of bread for themselves and their children. It's total nonsense, right? These union members are nothing more than radicalized, liberal, dogmatic graduates from university who have a desire to exercise their will over the entire nation. They do so from the shadows. No one knows their names. It keeps them uh, it keeps them from being exposed in the public eye, and they transform particular their particular organizations and workforces and so on into practical soldiers for the liberals, for the left. And so their purpose is not to ensure that Albertans maintain the highest benefits for Alberta. Their purpose is not to ensure we have the highest quality of life. Instead, their purpose is to manifest this Orwellian vision of what Canada should be, of what Canada should look like. And it's completely contrary to the quality of life that we desire. It's total nonsense, total nonsense. So the only way to approach this, to understand it, is to say union members, the bosses, do not want what's best for us. Instead, they want to see their liberal vision materialized. And even though that means our suffering, they don't care. They don't serve us. And they have instead an objective to completely crush this nation and turn it into something which isn't Canada. I don't, we can't be harsh enough about this. Like yeah, we can't be harsh enough about it. What they're doing is so wrong, and it's been like this for a long time, right? The despicable response that we've seen as a consequence of Danielle Smith's uh, policy with schools from the unions is appalling. It's absolutely appalling. They should be ashamed of themselves. It's sick. They want to control our children, and it's totally evil. Totally evil.
Oops, wrong one. If I retire out of the country, will that affect me receiving my pension benefits?
Yeah, good question. No, no, this is called portability, and we already have treaties and so on, and agreements in place where, yeah, as it stands right now, if you retire and move to France, you still receive your Canadian pension plan, and the same would be true of Alberta. Yep, that wouldn't change. That wouldn't change at all. And again, if it did change, if we said you couldn't move out of Alberta um, with an Alberta pension plan, lest you lose it, then we wouldn't be allowed to leave the Canadian pension plan. So there's nothing to be concerned about there. Oh, sorry, you might be muted again.
No. I do that when you're talking, so nobody hears all my idiosyncrasies. This has been addressed, but I keep hearing, if it isn't broken, then why try to fix it? I wish I had a very short 2 or 3 sentence answer for this.
Yeah.
I hear you. You could give a short answer, but then expand upon that one, because
Sure.
that's something that I've been hearing quite a bit too.
Yeah. So the answer is it is broken. That's the answer, is the Canadian pension plan is broken and it needs to be fixed. And how it's broken? Well, first, for Alberta, it's broken insofar as we pay more into the pension plan than what we receive, and we do so by billions and billions and billions of dollars. Secondly, the earnings that individuals receive from the pension plan are anemic. They're not 10% returns, they're not 20% returns, they're 2.5 or 3.5% returns, which are not appropriate for seniors. Thirdly, the pension plan is taxed. It's called taxable income, which, as far as I'm concerned, is disgraceful, considering you're taxed once to pay for the pension, and then you're taxed again when you receive the pension benefits. And more than that, look at what the Canadian pension plan is investing in. It's a decarbonized agenda, it's a diversity, equity, inclusion agenda. It's turning into a social activist organization rather than a proper pension manager. And so just those four facts alone prove why the system itself is broken. Government is getting bigger. They're injecting more um, social change into their policies, which should have nothing to do with social change. And our benefits are not acceptable. They're not acceptable and have to change.
I have an actual question that I've been hearing quite a bit about,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the CPP going to crash? If we don't do this, um, are we going to end up not having a retirement plan because the CPP is going to uh, totally, because we're acting as a Ponzi scheme right now, and
Right. Yeah.
and also they're bringing in immigrants to try and get enough money into the fund to
Yeah.
keep it going. So
Yeah.
that's probably a loaded question.
No, but it's true. It's accurate. Well, is the CPP going to crash? Let's suppose Alberta stays into it. If you look at the official reports, the answer is no, right? The answer is it's still sustainable. They're trying to keep everyone calm, and they say the CPP is still sustainable. It's true that, again, as I mentioned before, we have this massive unfunded liability of $1 trillion plus in the future, right? And so we have to dip into more and more and more benefits or assets, excuse me, to try and pay for um, all of those seniors. But proponents of the CPP will say, well, yeah, but the assets will continue to grow. They'll keep growing. They'll keep growing. They'll keep growing. It's okay. But then when you look at the analysis, when you look at the actual analysis of the numbers, it assumes very many things. It assumes a very ideal future, a very ideal situation in the future, which I am not convinced is the case. Look at the last few years, right? The pension plan took a massive hit. The investing board took a massive hit over these last few years because of the current market situation. And as the pension plan dips deeper and deeper into the Canadian pension plan itself, in its assets, as it dips deeper into the assets to try and pay for pensioners, it relies more and more and more on excellent market conditions, right? Because they're assuming that their assets will continue to grow at a pretty impressive rate. And if 1 or 2 or 5 years the market changes and it looks very much different than what it does in prime years, all of a sudden the situation changes and changes drastically and dramatically. That's if Alberta stays. If Alberta leaves, then the situation becomes much more, all the more, all the more, what would be the word? Perilous. Yes, perilous for the Canadian pension plan. So, will it crash? Well, I prefer to prophesy after the event has already occurred. So, I wouldn't be prepared to say one way or the other, insofar as government could change contribution rates, they could increase contribution rates, they could do a couple of things to try and maintain that Canadian pension plan. We've seen them increase contribution rates already, right? They continue to do so to try and make sure it maintains its position. And I think before the Canadian Pension Plan crashed, government would just as soon increase the tax to try and keep it afloat. We've seen that they're willing to do so before, and I have no doubt they're willing or would be willing to do so again. Granted, if an Alberta pension plan started, it very well might be a fuse that lights a fire under the rest of the provinces to see that, as a matter of fact, the Canadian pension plan operates more like a welfare system than it does a proper pension plan. And the benefits are not, again, the juggernauts that we've been led to believe that they are. And so they might leave too. And perhaps that's the desire. Perhaps that's the hope with an Alberta pension plan, that it shows other Canadians that a better future is possible, detached from the central government, detached from Ottawa's bureaucracy. That's the hope.
This next one is actually a two-parter, but there's a character limit on it, so I'll put up the first part here. Uh, why, why, why is it, do you think, that the UCP government hasn't been working as hard as some of us private entities to get this information out to Alberta citizens? I keep being told by MLAs that they are waiting for the actuary numbers. Yet it's clear that there are a lot of us. There's lots for us to learn, regardless of learning that figure.
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be entirely honest, I don't have contact with many or hardly any of the UCP's caucus or MLA. So I don't particularly know the answer to the question. I would agree with you that the release of the pension plan and the information pertaining to it has been rather sloppy. I don't think it's been handled in an efficient manner, and I think that reflects on the response and the reception from Albertans. I've been rather confused by the release of the pension plan. I have heard, as the questioner mentions, that the government is not prepared to make massive bold statements until a more concrete number is released from Ottawa. That's accurate. That's true. Why? I don't know.
This
See,
is all
yeah,
part of that same one again. Why
yeah.
do we have all of these public engagement sessions going on now when we won't hear actuary numbers until autumn, and there is no defined date for a referendum? It's all part of
Yeah,
that
I
same
actually,
question.
yeah, see, and I actually have no problem with the public sessions that are being held now, because as far as I'm concerned, the more prepared that we can make Albertans, the more proactive we are, the better. That's excellent. If we can if we can flood them with all of this information now in a way that's easy to digest, there is a far better probability that our desired objective here is achieved compared to what it would be if we tried to just shovel it in at the last minute, right before the referendum. We want people to be aware of what's happening, of what the situation looks like now, and to let them marinate in that with that information so that when the time comes for a referendum, um, people are prepared to vote yes in favor of an Alberta pension plan. Now, I do know that the Take Back Alberta has a petition, right, to see that a referendum is held by 2024, by the fall, by September 2024. We'll see how that looks. But at any rate, I think they're just being proactive. It's good to be proactive. So it might be that the referendum takes place a year from now. I don't know when it's going to be either, but let's do as much as we can at the present time to be prepared for the future.
Right. It would be very good that if that referendum was held at the same time as the municipal elections next year. That would
Yeah.
be the
Yes.
ideal.
Yep.
But in order to do that, we need to have it as a ballot initiative a year in advance, I believe. So we have to have them put it on by this fall. So that, I
Mhm.
believe that's why, and I believe the APP, the Alberta Prosperity Project, is also involved with that petition, getting it signed. I believe it is 200,000 signatures to get it.
200,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say this to anybody, and I'll post a link, because there's a link to where you can go to sign it. I'll post that in it once I upload this afterwards, because it's very important that we get as many people to sign, even if you're against it. Let's have a referendum on it, and let the people have their voice heard.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and Smith has to do so now. Like again, as I mentioned earlier, there's no legal mandate that demands a referendum for leaving the Canadian Pension Plan. But Smith, because she's promised and promised again and again Albertans a referendum, she has to have one. She has to have one politically. Yeah, if she doesn't, she'll be eaten alive by the NDP.
Now I'm going to get into a little conspiracy theory. Uh, do you think that there might be a little bit, the reason that the government isn't putting it out there is that there are a lot of the old Kennyites that are federalists, and they just do not want this issue to come up.
Oh, sure. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. Not at all. In fact, it'd be surprising if that wasn't the case, to be entirely honest. Absolutely. Um, the story of history is clear. Story of scripture is clear. When you transition regimes, you can't leave a single member from the old regime left. You can't. It doesn't work, right? It might be that even there might it might even be that they have good intentions. It still has to be cleared, right? When a politician or a leader is trying to enact such massive change, it will not work unless all of the old regime is removed from their positions of power. It has to happen. It must happen. Otherwise, the attempted transition will fail. It's guaranteed to fail because those individuals were there for a reason before. And it's because they most probably believed in the ideals of the regime from before. The new regime's ideals are different. The two don't harmonize. Now, the MLAs are one thing. And of course, there are bad MLAs and there are good MLAs and so on. My bigger concern is the bureaucracy underneath that we don't see, right? It's that massive, right? It's like an iceberg. We see the tip of an iceberg and we say, oh, it's beautiful, fantastic. And we can change that iceberg, change governments. But what we don't see is uh, the structure of the iceberg underneath the water, hidden underneath that plane of glass, right? There's this huge chunk of ice that we don't see unless we dive underneath the water into the cold and take a plunge. Likewise, we see MLAs, great. What we don't see is the bureaucracy that exists underneath them that stays constant. Even as MLAs change, that bureaucracy stays level and flat so far as those same individuals sit in their offices for 40 years and make the changes themselves and then use MLAs as a front to allow them to work in the shadows. So I think your hypothesis is more than probable. Yes.
Which is why I've been trying to figure out is when a minister takes over a department, why he doesn't just clean house when he first gets
Yeah,
in there.
it's a must. Totally agree with you. It's a must. It's a must. Yeah, and I've talked to old bureaucratic officials and so on, and it's been very interesting to hear how they speak because they'll say even the ones that were very humble and kind, they'd say, "Oh yeah, here's how it works. We give the politicians a piece of paper. It tells them exactly what to say, and it tells them what to vote on what bill, and then they do it, and we work from the back." Yep, and that certainly seems to be the way things are working. You're totally right. Clean house. You have to clean house. Yeah.
Kurt asks, another 3.2 billion headed to Ukraine while Canada is cutting defense spending. More Alberta, less Ottawa. The pension plan is a good start.
Yeah, the pension is a great start for more autonomy for Alberta. I completely agree. It is a heavy blow to Ottawa for us to start our own pension plan. Absolutely agree. Yeah, it's a necessary and critical step to maintain, and no, not to maintain, to generate more independence for the province.
Well, this is probably a good time for me to actually read a couple of live feeds from people that have helped make this podcast possible, and then we'll transition into more talk about how much we hate Ottawa. So I'll I'll do those live feeds and then we can do that. Creations by Zane. What we have survived through the last few years have taught us many important lessons. We now know that what we put in our bodies and on our bodies affects our lives and health. We also realize the need to work with our neighbors and support local businesses. Creations by Zane is a local Alberta-based family business that specializes in our own custom small batch line of natural skincare solutions. By creating face creams, body lotions, beard products, lip balms, hair treatment products, insect repellents, our ever-evolving product line meets the specific needs we face in the harsh, dry environment of Western Canada. Our products are based on years of study, education, research, and application. The next time you use a skincare product, including makeup, etc., take a moment to read the ingredient label. Is that really what you want on your body? Instead, treat your body with the respect and care it deserves. Use Creations of Zane products. Be healthy. To receive 10% off when ordering, please utilize the code VOW for Voice of the West. This recognizes and helps support the Voice of the West. And I will actually contest to it. I use Zane's beard balm and beard oil, and I really, really like it. So remember, go to Creations by Zane's website, which is www.creationsbyzane.com, all one word, and take a look at what he has, and go ahead and order from him. He's excellent. Slouville Consignment Sales is a locally owned and operated small business which specializes in removing the hassle and stress out of online selling. Started in 2010, our patient, low-pressure approach to sales has resulted in hundreds of positive transactions between local sellers and buyers from all over Western Canada and the U.S. There has never been a better time to turn unwanted or unneeded items into cash. Slouville View will help you sell pretty much anything from $1,000 to $100,000 and more. Cars, trucks, trailers, farm equipment, tractors, boats, RVs, and more. Call Kurt Bloomquist at 403-704-4424 or email info@slouvilleview.ca. And I will post that in the contact for Kurt in the link below when I post it up online after. And now back to Tanner. There's a couple more questions, and then we can turn into that. Gord told us that by law, a pension fund is actually not allowed to have a huge surplus of money. So if that were to happen, and it would have to be paid out to beneficiaries, do you concur with this? And
well, insofar as if the suppose that we don't change contributions with an Alberta pension plan, and that would mean, of course, that we would have a surplus with regards to how much, compared to how much we pay out to seniors versus how much we pay into the fund, we would have a surplus. But then that would be used, yes, to invest, to be used to invest. Yeah. Again, the way that the Alberta pension plan structures itself can change a bit insofar as whether we increase benefits or decrease contribution rates. But yeah, it either has to be invested or it should go back into the pockets of Albertans.
Yeah, it we're not paying out enough as it is
No,
to seniors, so
that's right.
Needs
I agree.
to,
Yeah.
to
Oh,
be
that's
increased.
certain. Yeah, that's certain. That's certain.
Okay, well, let's switch over to talking about the feds. We'll start with what's happened in this last week with our prime minister having come to. Well, some of us don't consider him our prime minister, but having come to Alberta and literally breaking the Constitution with talking to the municipalities without going through the province, because as we all know, the Constitution clearly says that the municipalities have no power but that given to them by the provinces. So for him to have gone around the province to play their sneaky tricks, where we've now got 6 municipalities that have signed on with them to get money for housing, with conditions that they will let the feds change their bylaws. I mean, to me, that is incomprehensible that we're allowing that. As far as I'm concerned, it should have almost been the RCMP meet him at the plane and arrest him. But
Yeah,
I'd like
no,
to have you give a good your view on that.
It's a disgrace how Trudeau is. It's a disgrace how Trudeau is maneuvering around the proper boundaries that have been set up between the federal government and other levels of political power. But again, it's disgraceful, but it's not unsurprising. Here we have a federal government that cares about controlling the nation more than perhaps any government has in Canadian history before. And that's really saying something when you look at Pierre and you look at all of the other governments that have existed in this country. It goes to prove how Trudeau has absolutely no care for law or for tradition. That's also accurate. And instead is willing to do whatever he wants, whatever is right in his own eye, in the name of maintaining power and then increasing that power. He has no problem subverting or disregarding the provincial government in favor of discussing directly with municipal governments, which also proves where the allegiance of Amarjeet Sohi and Gondek and so on lie, as if it was ever in doubt. It's not, or it never was. But at any rate, he has no problem doing so if it means generating more power for himself. You look at for example, the Housing Accelerator Fund. You look at the stipulations in that Housing Accelerator Fund. It's simply to create a modern Babylon. That's it. That's what it's for, right? You have to have high density housing. You have to build up. You have to bunch people together like they're bricks, and it has to be a low carbon community and all this other nonsense that is so anti-life and anti-human. It could hardly be called public policy at all. It doesn't help the public. It does exactly the opposite. And yet, in his manifesto to see that he controls every aspect of every Canadian life, Trudeau still works as hard as he can to completely trespass across borders which are not his own. He doesn't like borders. He hates borders. He has no problem crossing. You know, it's interesting. Trudeau talked about years and years ago, we all know the quote, how Canada has the opportunity to be the world's first post-national state. Trudeau hates borders. He hates borders perhaps more than any man has ever hated borders in history before. It's why he has absolutely no problem trespassing between political lines. He's got no problem talking directly with municipal governments because he doesn't believe in the border, the boundary of federal, provincial, municipal. He doesn't believe in those boundaries because it restricts him, and he hates to be restricted. Instead, preferring to do, again, whatever he wants. I'm plugging this. This is what I talk about in Kingdom of Cain. Doing whatever he wants in the name of power, in the name of his control. It's despicable. It's disgraceful. Yeah. And the mayors of those cities should be ashamed of themselves for having met Trudeau in such a way. And by accepting all of this help from the federal government, they continue to indebt themselves to the federal government. And it's wrong. It's not right. It isn't right.
Could they not be held legally liable for a meeting like that, because it is against the Constitution?
Yeah, and see, I'm not a lawyer, so Leighton Gray would know much better than I about how to properly answer that. But I will say, at this point, you almost have to ask, does it matter? So it might be that we try to hold Trudeau accountable using the law or others, but he has demonstrated his ability to subvert that or those particular laws time and time and time and time again. He is exposed for corruption. He brushes it off. He's exposed again. He brushes it off. He's exposed another time. He just brushes it off. It's nonsense.
Yeah, and I wasn't even thinking about him. I was thinking more about the mayors of these towns and cities.
Well, yeah. Again, I actually think. Again, I wouldn't. If I knew more about laws in that regard, I would answer. But I'd say Leighton and stuff would certainly be better positioned to answer it. Now, I will say I'm quite confident of this, that it's far more effective for us. And I know this isn't quote unquote justice, but it's far more effective for us to simply remove the politician, like that recall legislation. It's the recall legislation is a joke in this province. It should be far simpler than what it is, but it's certainly far faster to remove Gondek by having the people do it legally than by sitting in court and waiting for years to watch a case like this play out, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. That we have to deal with these. It's absolutely ridiculous. Another question that's come up is: can Tanner address the subversive nature of UNDRIP into our communities?
Yeah, sure. It's more socialism. The way that all of this, I just did an article this morning about Westlock that I talked in there. I had a paragraph or two in that article where I discussed the reality that although some men and women have a fantasy of moving to a location that's so remote that government, UNDRIP, United Nations, WHO, WEF, and so on have no influence and have no care and just leave them alone, although they have such a fantasy of moving to such a place, it's exactly that. It's a fantasy. There is nowhere that um, these radicals won't infest and haven't infested. There's nowhere left to run. We can't run anywhere else, right? Because the radicals are already there. The activists are already there. The big organizations are already there. There's nowhere left to hide. We can't hide anymore. There's nowhere left we can go, right? Instead, the only option we have now is to legally fight and properly fight for our rights and freedoms. And the way that we're seeing them being taken away is, as the questioner mentioned, through these sinister programs that seem benevolent to the untrained eye and seem so compassionate to the untrained eye, that when in truth, when slipped in under the radar often, we realize just how powerful and controlling such programs are. And so that's how this radical conquer occurs, right? It occurs by instituting these seemingly harmless policies. Again, of course, they're not harmless, but if you read one page and go, oh, that seems harmless enough, instituting them under the radar and then growing like a virus from the source, from the host, as it gradually takes over more and more of the nation. And so again, it just speaks to how vigilant Albertans and Canadians have to be in ensuring that such policies aren't passed. Thorhild last year was a good example of that, right, with their bylaw. Westlock, another excellent example of that, and other examples exist across the provinces. So it's we have to be more vigilant now than ever, because the the motives of the motives of these planners are more sinister than ever, and the methods by which they exercise their control are more disguised than ever.
Uh, are you aware of the news lately that the federal government seems to have fabricated the evidence that initiated the Emergencies Act?
Yes, I haven't studied this in massive detail, but of course, like so many other Canadians, I've been following it and watching it. And again, that shouldn't be surprising, right? It would be surprising if they didn't fabricate evidence. It's not surprising at all that or if they did, in fact, fabricate evidence, considering government is comprised of politicians. It's just a synonym for liar. It seems to be the same. Whether you use the word politician or liar, you're speaking about the same person. Yes, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if that were the case, right? You look at Again, government is willing to do anything to conquer more power. They are ruthless in their determination to see themselves exercise more control over the nation, over the individuals in the nation. And if that means lying, then they'll lie. And if that means tying up a trial in court for years, then they'll do the same thing. Yeah, it's Solomon has a good quote, or a good piece of wisdom, right, in Ecclesiastes. All of us know it, which is nothing ever changes, right? The cycles repeat, right? Sun rises, sun sets, moon comes up, moon goes down, tides go in, tides go out, all of these things. And politicians lie, they get caught. They lie and they get caught. They lie and they get caught. That's one of these cycles that doesn't change in human history. It simply is a fact of nature as it stands right now, and it's up to us to expose all of these lies for what they are.
The ArriveCan scandal should be touched on.
Oh, what's that's another good one, because at this point, what's left to not touch from that scandal? It's been blown out of the water. It's fantastic, and it actually works well with the pension plan. because it goes to prove once again how government has absolutely no care for profit maximization or for rational economic investing procedure or thought at all. Zero. 60 million plus whatever it is for this app. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And if any private contractor, no, if any private business paid such, if any private individual working for an organization paid that sum of money for an app, they'd be fired immediately, and rightfully so, right? That would be the least of their concerns, because it's such a ridiculous and foolish thing to do. It's almost miraculous that such a debacle could even occur. But in government, what do they care? 60 million. That's what, $1.85 per Canadian, whatever, right? As far as they're concerned, who gives a rip? It's not our problem. Instead, we're going to help out our political friends. We're going to hand out some political favors so that we ensure that people vote for us again in the next election, right? They don't care about profit maximizing. They don't care about rational economic thought. They don't care about any of those things, preferring instead to care about maintaining their positions of power. And if that means $60 billion for an app, or 60 million, excuse me, for an app, then that's what they're going to pay. Yep, it's all the more reason. It shows all the more why we have to be removed from the federal government and the provincial government with regards to our pension plan and our money in general. The more independence that we can exercise from them, the better. And the sooner we can do it, the better.
Which kind of brings us into the next thing. I'd like to talk about the other APP, the Alberta Provincial Police. And all of this stuff leads into that. And I think that while working on the Alberta Pension Plan, we should also be planning on working on the Alberta Provincial Police. The RCMP has proved time and time again that they are, even though they technically answer to the province, they don't. They listen more to, if you're going right from the High River incident several years ago during the flooding, where they just kicked indoors and took rifles down to the Coots situation, where they not only did they go after the protesters and fabricate evidence in that case, but they destroyed a working man's excavators to the tune of millions of dollars worth of damage. I mean,
right.
And they're not held responsible. So we can talk about the Alberta Provincial Police, but what other things that I know we both sort of stand the same on separation, but without talking about separation, we need more sovereignty in this province. What else can we do to get that?
Right. So what can Smith and her government take control of right now legally, as it stands in Canadian law? Well, she can, as you mentioned, take control of police, pension, immigration, um, unemployment, right, and taxation. She can take control of those five things, and she can release the federal government of that burden of power, and instead can
I would say
institute
there's
it in
six
Alberta.
things.
The sixth being,
Healthcare.
yes, right,
And get rid of the
yeah,
influence of Health Canada, because they
yes, no,
have way too much power.
that's true too, and it's she made it tougher for herself when she signed that deal last year. I suppose that might have been my hesitation. You're right, but yes, it's yeah, I had wished we hadn't signed that. But at any rate, so let's suppose there are six, right? She should do all of those things now as fast as possible to, as you mentioned, guarantee more autonomy and independence for Alberta. It's absolutely necessary. You look at all that the federal government is doing, you look at what they're involved in, you look at what they want to turn the country into, you look at the state of the country itself, and it becomes abundantly clear that the less power that corrupted government can exercise over us, the better. The more, if we're going to have these institutions, then they should be as close to home as possible, because that way we're able to monitor them easier than if they are thousands of kilometers away in the east, right? Guarded, armed and guarded by this massive bureaucracy. If we can again release the government from all of that burden of power, oh, it's so difficult to govern. Great, let's do it. We have to do it. You're absolutely right about the RCMP, about how they're beholden to their leaders in Ottawa, Immigration, same thing. This mass immigration policy is absolute nonsense. As far as I was concerned, I would shut down all immigration at once, right now, like immediately. And um, those who are not Canadian citizens, who are temporary here in Canada, have to go home. That's not a harsh thing to say. It's a fact of the current situation that we're in. We're in a state where this government is trying to rip the country apart by instituting this diversity policy where people have different fundamental and foundational beliefs about how the world works, and then the government expects us to live in harmony together, and it's total nonsense. How is that possible when one group believes in abusing women or beating women at their will, and another says that's completely reprehensible? Are those two groups supposed to live together? And the answer is manifestly not. And so all of that has to change. Otherwise, the country it's already in peril. Um, but then it'll be if nothing changes, it'll be torn apart. It's already tearing, right? It's already in a sense, it's already torn apart. Trudeau's done a magnificent job of that. If his objective and desire was to and is to see Canada fractured or broken, then he's accomplished it. He's done a wonderful job, right? If that's his objective, he's carried it out with perfect efficiency. If his task is, as he publicly says, to fix Canada and to unify it, then his policies are nonsense and his task is a total failure.
Now on to something as an economist. Uh, there's been an order put out by the regulators that Bow Valley Credit Union can't back their assets with gold. Now that's coming from the federal government regulators. They don't have any say over the credit unions, do they? And do you think it's a smart idea that um, a, a credit union, which isn't a bank, it's a credit union, but that they're backing their assets with hard uh, they're backing their assets with hard assets.
Right, right. Well, of course, Brett is more, he'd be better to ask about this perhaps than I, but as far as the regulators go, so you're quite right that Bow Valley Credit Union and other credit unions operate differently than, say, RBC or TD or the other big banks here in the country. And although they're not subject to the same regulations and same control that those big banks are, they are still subject to some regulation. Now, should the regulators have the ability to say you can't back your deposits with gold, or some of them at least if you want? And the answer is no. That's nonsense, right? Especially because that makes economic sense to do so. That is such. It's it's such nonsense. If we were to start over and set up a banking system, first of all, I'd back the currency by gold. Yes, I think it's a good idea to do so. I think it's an excellent idea to do so. Of course, the strategy for investing and for security is diversity, right? Diversify your asset portfolio, diversify what you're invested in, and so on. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. It's the age-old proverb of wisdom with regards to investing. But if we could do it all over again, I would say, let's back the currency by gold. Not like the states did it, because they were still allowed to manipulate it, and the government was allowed to manipulate it and play with the amount of. Sorry, I'm messing here. Sorry about that. The government still had the ability to manipulate the currency, and they did, right? And of course, it led to the destruction of that standard, which wasn't much of a standard at all. At any rate, the regulators themselves have too much control over the banks. If I were to set it up again, I would say, let a bank do what it wants. Let the banks do what they want. Let them invest in what they will. Let them loan out what they will. Let them guarantee their deposits as they desire, and so on. And then if they fail, they fail. Don't bail them out, right? Because as it stands, banks right now know that if they do fail, they're going to be bailed out, right? At least the big ones do. And so why would they manage risk properly, right? We saw that in '08. We saw that in before '08, where when all consequence is removed from action, then action becomes reckless, becomes ridiculous. And so with regards to banks, not just here, but all over the place, right? If they know that the federal government is going to bail them out, if they do indeed go under because of risky unbelievably risky investment, then they're going to make risky investments, or they're going to be more apt to do so. Yeah, regulator has too much control. Bow Valley should be allowed to do what it wants. I think Brett is exercising monetary sensibility and investing sensibility and banking sensibility, which is all too foreign in this world of ours.
Which brings, speaking of gold backing, is there any reason why the province can't start investing in gold so that we can back? Everybody knows the Canadian dollar is going to be worthless because of the way they've been printing it, and it's going to drive inflation up. Is there any reason why, like the Heritage Trust Fund, part of that couldn't be turned into hard gold assets? So
No,
that
yeah,
when it happens.
yeah, yeah. You could buy gold certainly. Like if the province wanted to invest in that, there'd be no reason. There's nothing that stops him from doing so. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, physical gold is superior to stock in a gold company or a gold mine. Um, but yeah, there's nothing that says you can't do so, right? If the province wishes to purchase with its surplus some gold, they have every right and every legal opportunity to do that, and I think they should. Um, yeah, yeah, I think they should. Yeah, whether could you start your own currency? That's a different topic. It couldn't be used as tender in Canada, but at any rate,
No, and because we have to use, but if the dollar crashes and you have that would make the Heritage Trust Fund the way it sits now worthless if that happens. But
right,
if it was backed by
right,
gold, we would still have the assets, so there'd be something for Alberta's future there.
right.
We
Yes.
got another question about the Alberta Pension Plan. Back to the AbPP. Why isn't the CPC supporting the AbPP?
Yeah, because again, they're a federalist party. They want to try, and they know too that if Alberta left, you would lose that significant portion of asset. They like that asset, the investing board's assets, and yeah, their interests are not Alberta's own. That's not even necessarily a strike against them. It's just a fact of reality. Take Polyev, for example. His goal is not to ensure the flourishing of Alberta, but rather to maintain power, and that means um,
And
promising benefits for all
I
Canadians.
I understand that question, but I also know that he has to win the next election, and if he came out in
Right,
favor of it, however, I do think that he should have just kept his mouth shut. That would have been the best
right,
solution to
right,
that. Don't give your opinion
right,
one way or the other. But I understand when he did give it, why he gave the opinion that he did, uh,
right,
and so that is, he's a federal politician, and they need the party to win. And if you came out in support of Alberta, you're not going to win the East. And when it comes to federal politics, we don't matter out here in the West. So
right.
I
Yeah,
understand
see,
that entirely.
Poilievre's playing politics. He knows that whether he endorses the Alberta pension plan or not, he's still going to get Alberta's votes. So he might as well not and say we should stay in it. And that way he might buy a few votes. He might get a few votes from the East maybe by saying that. Who knows? But he certainly won't lose any or very minimal from Alberta by saying that. So he's weighing his odds and playing a political game. Yes.
Well, we have a few minutes left now. You just held something up a couple minutes ago. Why don't you give us a full breakdown, and then do you have access to post in the comments
Oh,
on
I
the
think
stream there?
well,
Put the
I can
link to
post
where
it
they
to
can
you.
buy your book as well into
Sure, I can
there.
do that. Sure, I can do
And
that.
yeah,
That'd be quite
and
lovely.
then
Yeah, so
tell us
this
all
is
about the book and why they should buy it, and uh, we'll
that. There we go. Okay, I sent it to you. Yeah, so this is okay. So this is Kingdom of Cain. I wrote it um, over the span of, I don't know, a few months. It's not meant to be a very long book. It's about the same length as my last book, but it's a bit bigger in size. Anyways, I wrote it because, like you and everyone else probably on the stream, I saw what Trudeau was doing and see what Trudeau's doing to the country, and I think it's reprehensible. And so I said, why exactly, first of all, is Trudeau doing what he's doing? But besides that point, why is it wrong? You know, So I talk about education, for example. I have a chapter here about education. And I say, the start of it goes, modern educators love to virtue signal, and they offer territory acknowledgements, and they declare that our schools sit on stolen land. But strangely, it seems none of the educators are serious or convicted enough to give the land back, right? We talk about all of this virtue signaling and discuss why they're trying to control children. What's the purpose? The next chapter has to do with socialism. Why is it, for example, that Trudeau is trying to adopt these big government policies and these big economic policies that steals away autonomy from the individual? And the answer I give is because economic power is more influential than military power, right? It's far more enticing for a man to vote for a politician if the politician gives his starving children a loaf of bread than it does, or than it is if the politician rolls a tank through the streets. And so if Trudeau, I argue, can at first destitute the nation, he can force them to be dependent on the federal government and therefore buy voters for life. I talk about law and how Trudeau himself is lawless and the government is lawless, and why they're lawless. They do instead what's right in their own eyes. And then as a final chapter, because I'm a Christian, I give what I believe to be the answer, the solution to this problem. I call it the kingdom of the cross, because the book is called Kingdom of Cain. And I talk about Christ and how Christ, it's curious, Christ and Christians, social conservatism, and so on, is really the only way to progress, right? All of these radical activists call themselves progressives, but they discover too late that they can't progress at all. They're stagnant. They're stalled for reasons I give in the book. They can't progress one bit, instead preferring to just kind of sit in one position and act like independent thinkers, even though they're all exercising the most egregious form of groupthink. For the social conservative, for the Christian, for the follower of Christ, however, true progress is possible. We can move forward in society, making the nations more free, generating more independence for families, giving families a greater opportunity to do what they will and flourish in society, and so on and so on. So it was so much fun to write. It's been a lot of fun to market it. It's been a lot of fun to discuss it. Yeah, it's been a blessing. I've had a lot of fun with it. If you're interested in it, I actually sent you there in the private chat the link to the book. I sell them at all my events. I sell them on Amazon, and if desired, from my website. People can just send an email from my website. It's just tannernaday.com, and yeah, I can ship them from there too. So it was fun. It was a blessing to write. I've got another one on the go now. There's another one coming, hopefully by the end of the year, and yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, it has some influence in crumbling, Trudeau's kingdom of Cain.
I was moving it across to
Perfect.
where I
Thank
had
you.
access to it, and I'll make sure that it gets up into the when I put the stream up after. The next thing, and I think probably the final thing, let's talk about March 9th.
Fun.
And
Yeah,
and hopefully we can get some more people coming out to that.
that would be good.
Tanner, I have arranged, and Tanner and his brother would be coming to Lloydminster to do a train the trainer on the Alberta Pension Plan. I'll get you to speak a little bit about it, and then I will tell them pricing and how to get a hold of me, and to get registered, and the discount that we'll be offering.
It'll be great. Oh, we're very excited. At Morningside, we had so much fun. Hunter and I, we had so much fun doing this lecture series on the pension plan. And so for this new one in Lloyd, we've revised, I think, all of the slides. We've updated them. We've added more information. We've made the lectures more efficient. Of course, there are 4 of them. We break them up into sections. We have lunch together. It's interactive. Of course, people can, they're sitting at tables and they can take notes and ask questions and have discussion. It was very productive. And what the purpose of the lectures themselves is to, one, of course, provide information about the pension plan, but secondly, and perhaps more importantly, sometimes I wonder, we're trying to provide tools that enable people to argue for the pension plan. How do you talk about this with your neighbor? What do you talk about with your neighbor? What points should you bring up? What are common arguments against a pension plan so that people are equipped to go out into the province and advocate for this so important policy?
Yes, like you said, Morningside was excellent. It was very informative, and it's not like when you go, even watching this live stream or going to a town hall. It is an in-depth, breaks it down so that when somebody questions you, you don't have to think about, oh, I heard that somewhere. The answer to that, you know the answers so that you can come back at them and answer that question. It's far superior. Now we do have to charge a fee for it because I if I could afford to be independently wealthy and throw this on, I would do that. So we have the price set at $50 per person, and it's limited to 100 people. However, if you send an email to Alberta Pension Plan TT at gmail.com, and I will put that link down below, and you use the word VOW, VOW in it, you will get a 10% discount. We want to fill the class, and it's that we want to make it so that people are able to come. It's going to be held at the Border Inn, and it's going to be a 5-hour course. Well, it's actually 4 hours with breaks. We take lots of breaks, but it is well worth it to take and attend.
Yes. It's been so much fun. It was so much fun. Yeah, Hunter and I, we just loved it. Yeah, it was fun. We could crack jokes, and the interaction is valuable. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's much more valuable than an online presentation, we found.
I would agree 100%. I think we have touched upon almost everything. Is there anything that I'm missing or that you want to add to what we've discussed today?
I think that's a great stopping point. That was a good 2 hours. Yeah, that was fun.
Well, I want to thank you again for joining me on the premiere episode. I'm going to try to do it again next Saturday, and we'll have another person in, but I'm very glad that you were the first guest, because I think that the Alberta Pension Plan is the number one issue that is facing Alberta right now. People may not realize it, but it is. We're going to have to make a decision. Even if you don't agree with it, please get the facts about it and get to understand it, and understand how mismanaged the CPP is right now. And I think you'll come to the same conclusion that I know both Tanner and I have, that it's time that Alberta takes control of that. But make sure that you have an informed view of it. And I'd like to thank Tanner again, and we will see everybody next week. Thank you.